Welcome to Review the Future, the podcast that takes an in-depth look at the impact of technology on culture.
I'm Ted Cupper.
I'm John Perry.
And today on Review the Future, we are talking about a movie called I Am Mother.
This is a Netflix movie. You can go watch it right now, and you should, in fact, if you don't want us to spoil it for you, because that's what we're about to do. This is a science fiction movie directed by Grant Sputore and written by Michael Lloyd Green.
That's right. And this is a pretty interesting sort of low-budget sci-fi movie, sort of in the tradition of like an Ex Machina. And we're just going to spoil the story for you right now. So here it comes. Basically, the premise of this thing is that you are watching a human girl being raised by a robot mother. So the very first thing you learn is that there's been some kind of human extinction event, and we are located in this repopulation center where there's thousands of embryos and one humanoid robot, and it picks an embryo out and puts it in the incubator, makes a human girl, and then the first part of the movie is basically this girl being raised by this robot and told that she is going to repopulate the earth.
And as far as she knows, it's completely uninhabitable outside this facility, and there are no other humans. But of course, that perception of hers is exploded when she actually encounters another living human that is roaming around outside and eventually talks her way into the facility. And that's one of the first major reveals, and there's several more after that, ultimately culminating in the horrible truth that, in fact, the mother robot is responsible for the human extinction event, and that this whole repopulation effort is really more of a reset and redesign of the human race to make a better version of them. So it's one of these stories that takes you on a journey where you're thinking one thing and then eventually end up in a somewhat different place. Although I predicted some of this as I was watching. I don't know, Ted, did you see it coming, the ending?
Yeah, I mean, I think certain cinematic ticks that the movie has, including the scary music that they play during a lot of the sort of touching mother-daughter robot girl scenes up front, makes you think, well, something sinister is certainly happening. And then I had this feeling throughout that it was strange to me how little surveillance the robot seemed to have access to, given that it was, basically in charge of this facility. But then that turns out to be a dodge. Like, later in the movie, we basically find out that the robot did know what was going on throughout. Whether or not it literally had surveillance is not answered, but it knew everything, and it was just allowing this all to happen because it's all part of its elaborate 11-dimensional chess to test its human subject to see if it's a good human or something. And we'll get into the specifics of that later. That's where the movie sometimes didn't fully work for me, but I definitely started to think that this robot was going to be an evil robot on some level pretty early on.
Yeah, and that's certainly the more conventional place for this to end up. But the initial premise actually is, in some ways, more interesting. The idea of a robot steering humanity through this repopulation process. Although there are the signs, like you said, the lack of surveillance, certain things that looked back on. You realize wouldn't have made sense if given like the initial premise actually being true.
Right.
And they do give it away right away. So the first thing you see, right, is it's like one day since the extinction event, and we see a child being put through this super fast embryonic development process. It seems like it only takes a day to grow
24
a baby.
hours to cook a baby. Yeah. That's right.
So that's the first sort of fantastical superhuman technology that we see, and we see a child raised, and we see it put through. And this part I thought was kind of interesting. The robot's trying different things, running sort of a learning algorithm. It'll sing one lullaby that doesn't work, so then it switches abruptly to another one, right?
Yeah.
And so we see this this baby get raised, and then all of a sudden we cut to black, and we get a new title card that says now it's been 13,867 days since the extinction event. Now,
right.
Only because I was watching this for the sake of this podcast did I actually pause the screen there, and I actually got out a calculator and did the division here, divided that number by 365 days per year. And what you discover is that, okay, after this title card, the daughter we're about to see should now be 38 years old. But we see her, and I mean, how old do you think she looks? And certainly
But
not.
Clara Rugard is the actress. I think she's 21, and the girl looks, no older than that.
So it's like a late teenager to me.
Somewhere in the 18 to 20 kind of range is where I would guess they are putting this girl's age.
So if you have a calculator on hand, you might see the twist immediately, I suppose.
Right. And I didn't do the division, but that number did seem long, and I just sort of stored it away in the back of my head. And then I was like, I don't know how many years that is, but it seems like a lot of them. And then I forgot about it, which is what the movie wants you to do. And then later, when there's a pretty dramatic scene when the girl pulls out one of the drawers of embryos and finds a whole bunch of them are missing, and she realizes like there were previous girls who were raised and they didn't pass the test or whatever, and they ended up in the incinerator in the basement, basically.
Which makes sense, right? Because again, we see the robot like try one lullaby, that doesn't work, try another one, using this trial and error approach. So it makes sense that the trial and error approach might just apply to, on a certain level, entire human beings, right? This human's not
and it
working
might be
out.
hard to raise a child in isolation with just a robot. So you could definitely see the possibility that maybe these kids like went insane, or it's portrayed as this horrible tragedy, and on a certain gut level, it's terrifying to think of a robot, culling children. But it's not really explored in the movie too much whether that was a good idea or not. I mean, objectively, had there not been an evil plot to re-engineer human beings from the beginning, that might have actually been a good strategy, right?
Well, actually, yeah. So let's talk about the assumed premise at the beginning, which I think is interesting, which is that,
right.
humans...
In a way, it's almost more interesting, so we should focus on that. Yeah.
Right. Humans might have set up an insurance plan, right?
Right.
So we figure like, well, we're going to die, or at least there's a chance. Maybe someone really forward thinking is like, well, there's some chance that we're going to have some extinction event. And so why don't we set up this, this deep bunker, this like secure facility, put some human embryos in it. Now it's a little more of a stretch to imagine an AI of this quality being able to actually regrow the humans, but sure. I mean, for the sake of the premise, like you might include that. To me, the slightly more plausible version of this, and something that we could literally almost do today if someone wanted to, as like a nonprofit or something, is you could say, look, humanity might extinct itself, so why don't we take some human DNA, some embryos or whatever, and put it in a really secure place, on just some obscure gamble that, maybe millennia from now, another life form or aliens finds it, at least some in that small way, like humanity persists, right? Sort of like long shot, like insurance plan that you could set up now with no AI technology.
I see. Yeah. I thought you were going to suggest a buried facility that has embryos stored in it, but that has a small human staff that could live there and, breed and they just volunteer to live there forever, just in case humanity dies, like mole people, basically, like a small family of mole people.
If you could convince people to do that or something, or maybe it would be like a rotating tour of duty where you'd be sent down there.
Yeah, like missileers in the Air Force, the guys who sit there and wait to press the button. Right. That's like a tour of duty. You have to be very, you have to be chosen for it. It's hard to get, but then you're just sitting in a box for 24 hours at a stretch for a period of time.
Yeah, we always have to have some...
They don't make you do it forever.
Some number of qualified people with all requisite skills in the deep bunker, ready to repopulate humanity in case of the worst scenario, right?
Yeah. That's what I thought you were going to say. That is plausible to me. It's a little, it'd be expensive, but I feel like we could do that if we wanted to.
Yeah, and of course, if you have this level of AI, then you could also... you could maybe do this robot thing. Although, the first problem I have with this movie, from a sort of nerdy, this doesn't quite add up perspective, even given the twist ending, isn't there like sort of an issue with like, I mean, I'm not entirely sure about this, but with a human being raised by like something that just has this like metal expressionless face, like can you develop properly if you don't have like a human face that's like reacting to your and mirroring like your emotions? Like, would you be well adjusted in that scenario? Like, it seems like you would want this robot to have more of a humanoid face with expressions, or at least like a TV face that could like play.
Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't go with an animated face. You know, they have this. It's got these two lights that sort of move and that do a little bit of expression. But I think the robot was designed for cool robot look, not for realism there. I agree. I think it would have been a TV face with like an animated humanoid face would probably work a lot better. They do show that the girl has video of like old television and stuff like that, so maybe that helps. But
right, but
I think she would be screwed up. I think also, I mean, the interesting part of the early part of the movie is wondering whether this girl is screwed up and whether she has come out, you know, well adjusted or whatever you would call, you know, not insane, given that you're the only human on Earth, right? I mean, if the initial lie was actually the truth, and she was being raised in this facility by a benevolent AI, and there really were no other humans, she could still come out totally maladjusted, right? I mean, that's a very unusual circumstance to be a human in. And I thought they did a pretty good job up front of dramatizing that worry, where the robot is concerned with her ethics and her philosophy and sort of, you know, what she thinks about things. But we as humans are much more tuned into like, what is she doing? And is she a good person? Which gets tested when this Hilary Swank character shows up at the door and is hurt or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I could certainly imagine another movie that was all about that, all about her being maladjusted and the robot doing its best to adapt to that, but like not maybe having some limitations to its programming or something. That would be a much harder movie to write, but probably one I would like watching better at the end of the day. But, you know, but we get the inklings of that certainly in like the first half of this movie.
Yeah, that was my favorite part of this movie, was the first half really made me think about some of the actual issues that might be embedded in like a robot nanny, you know, something that might actually happen where like you're not isolated from all of humanity. You have parents, but maybe the person who is doing the most of your childcare is a robotic, you know, entity. And if that's the case, yeah, how does that affect you? Do you relate to humans differently? Are you poorly adjusted, or do you just adapt to that stuff? I mean, I'm not 100% certain that that wouldn't work actually, but it seems an interesting thing to consider.
Right, and she's being given access to television. She's being taught ballet, I guess, and she's being like, birthdays are being celebrated, so she's getting certain things to sort of like make her a little more adjusted as a human being. But she's also getting this like utilitarian ethics schooling, right? Or at least that's the only lesson we see, is this sort of classic, would you like murder one person to save five with the organs type of scenario.
Yeah, there's a lot of trolley problem sort of variations. And then there's a final test that is alluded to throughout the movie and then is finally given. And it's basically one of those psychiatric evaluation tests, right? I mean, it's presented in a kind of sci-fi way with some stuff on screens and stuff, but it seems similar to those kind of tests that they give people to try to figure out, you know, if they have mental disorders.
Right. Like, is she going to be effective or not? But I do
like, is she a psychopath? I mean, I think that's what the computer is testing for, or something along those lines. You know, is she mentally, you know, all there?
I do want to like spend a little bit of time on this utilitarian thing though, right? Because that's obviously gets echoed in the reveal, right? Where, I mean, that turns out to, as far as, I mean, it's very sketchy, right? But apparently, when we learn that the robot's motivation here is like to sort of save humanity from itself and like kill all of humans in order to make a better version of them, it's sort of justified from the robot's perspective on these same sort of utilitarian lines. Like, yeah, okay, we killed all of humanity, but if we restart humanity better, then, imagine how big they will grow to be or how successful they will grow to be, right? So like that original scene, which you think is like, oh, it's just trying to teach her to think correctly and be ethical, is like really just like revealing like the robot's biases. And like that's the sort of that like extreme utilitarianism, like is sort of the villain of the story in the background, I guess, right? I mean, that's always like, it's
right.
It's a little bit like the whole paperclip maximizer thing. It's like if like somebody at one point told this robot, like, your goal is to like maximize like human life in the universe, and it's like, well, okay, we can do that, but first we got to push the reset button, and over many millennia we'll get to we'll easily come out net ahead of this extinction, this temporary extinction I'm going to cause.
Right. That was a little bit confusing to me as I was watching because it's from the robot stories. It seems like this facility was created in case of a extinction event. Then some AI became super intelligent and realized human extinction is inevitable. It did some sort of calculations and it just couldn't see a way that human extinction could be avoided. So it decided to take action, speed up the process, and engineer this better human to replace humans now while it had the ability to do so. Which, it's like Skynet. It's like the paperclip maximizer. It's classic example of what's the Boston term for that? It's like value drift, right? Is that the term? Like where it's set up to do one thing, and then in order to do the thing, it starts doing something else, and eventually what it's trying to do is different.
Well, or
what it was set up for. Is that
well?
Right?
I'm not sure if value drift. I'm not 100% sure like what the term would be for what you're saying, but like value drift to me implies that like the objectives would change. But here, like the objective stays the same. It's just like so the objective is so simply defined and it's so monomaniacal in its pursuit of it that.
Well, hang on. Does the objective change? Because this is what was confusing to me. Because if the objective just to repopulate the Earth in the event of an extinction?
I'm reading into this, right? Because the movie doesn't tell us this. So I'm imagining that the objective, was something like make sure like lots of human beings survive and flourish or something. And the robot's like, well, they're all going to die anyways unless because they're fundamentally flawed. So we're going to have to start over to actually achieve this objective. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm reading.
It's just strange. Yeah, it's just strange because in an extinction event, the starting over would be a fait accompli, right? So it's weird that what the robot did was it like backed up from its goals. Like it's like, I'm supposed to activate an extinction event, make humans flourish, but I'll just activate now, create the extinction event, and then I'll make humans flourish. It feels strange to me compared to the Skynet version of this, which is like they make a machine to protect the Earth. It realizes the biggest threat to the Earth are humans, which by certain metrics is true, and then it just extinguishes the humans to protect the Earth. But that's a situation where
it's hard.
The people didn't code the preference carefully enough, and they weren't clear enough about what they meant, and then the robot follows logical. Right.
No, I still think this could be somewhat logical. I still think it seems like a stretch that the best way to achieve human flourishing is to push the reset button and not to work with what you've got. And
no, the part that I'm having trouble with isn't that though. The part I'm having trouble with is why is its goal to create human flourishing when its goal should just be react in the case of an extinction event.
Oh, but I'm guessing
like,
that wasn't
it shouldn't
its
be
goal.
active at all.
I'm guessing that wasn't.
It should just be a dormant thing waiting for an extinction event until.
But that goal isn't like the movie doesn't say that it has that goal.
The robot says it has that goal. It could be lying though, because the robot's lying about other things. So this is part of what I was confused about.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah, maybe. That was definitely like the assumed goal for the first half of the movie. I guess I just wrote that off at a certain point. It's like, oh, that has nothing to do with anything, right? That's just part
That's
of the
just the lie
story.
that the robot's telling the. But so then that leads me to think that this robot in this facility is it's just a outgrowth of a larger super intelligent AI that emerged somewhere else and decided independently that it was going to cleanse humanity just for the fun of it, and then constructed the facility, constructed the mother robot, populated the facility, et cetera, all under false pretenses.
That's my reading of it, actually.
Yeah, and I thought that was possible when I was watching it, but that struck me as very grandiose versus, humanity having made this facility on purpose, humanity having made robotics in general on purpose, and then not realizing that all their AI had sort of joined together into one super being and taken over the earth, and then slowly started to sort of change its goals, which is, I guess, my first assumption when I was watching the film. I realized both things were possible, but I was confused as to which it was trying to tell me it was.
Well,
and if it's that second one, then I have a little bit of a logic issue because I don't quite understand how the robot made the logical leap from I am supposed to activate in the event of this thing happening to I should cause this thing to happen so that I can activate.
Right. Yeah, I think the first one's more consistent with the movie. I think the second one, had it actually followed through on that premise, would have been a more interesting alternate movie, right? Where it was told to basically resurrect humanity. There was an unplanned extinction event that the robot didn't cause, but the resurrection process was fundamentally flawed because it was programmed by humans ahead of time, not fully grasping how that situation would go down. And then the robot does have some kind of value drift or something unintended, where it sort of turns evil during the process of doing its initial job of resurrecting humanity, right?
Yes. And that brings up something I wanted to talk about, which is my favorite thing that this movie did during the first part of it was a purely metaphoric thing that it did. So this isn't a speculative thing at all, but I think we can bring it back. But it made this analogy that I really liked between the AI and the girl's relationship and a like sort of just toxic parent-child relationship, like a codependent or like overbearing parent. And I started to get the sense early on that, there's this one line where she asks why there's only one of her, and the robot says something like mothers need time. It's a very like vague line where maybe she's saying she need to learn how to do it, or maybe she's tacitly acknowledging all the dead embryos in the incinerator or what. But what I liked about that was the idea that maybe this AI robot mother thing has been like programmed to fall in love with the children it raises, and it just has value drift and it basically doesn't want to let her go.
Right.
And that it goes from being purely benevolent to being purely evil without changing its goal, which is just like protect and care for this child. And that was fun for me to think about, because that's a cool metaphor to just like, the complexity of actually having and raising children, even if you're just a regular old fleshy human, because there is an amount of loving your child that's too much, right?
There's all sorts of ways for like well-intentioned parenting to go wrong, and it'd be very easy for this movie to be about that, and ultimately it's about these twists, really.
Well, it's about that for a little while, which I think is my favorite part of it. But yeah, the twists weren't as fun for me because I felt like each twist brought it closer to something I'd already seen before, as opposed to being like Robot Mommy Dearest or something.
Oh, yeah. No, I think we're talking...
I was much more interested in, actually.
Yeah, I would rather watch this other version we're talking about. And the other thing about this story, too, is like, this is another one of these stories where the twist means that, okay, so everything that you've seen now was orchestrated by this AI. So that means the early incident with the power shortage and the mouse, where the mother pretends to be like shut down and asleep, or like this whole drama with the woman from outside who's apparently only allowed to exist. But this is what like the really final twist, right? Is that the sort of lone survivor outside that like comes to the facility.
Right, the Hilary Swank character.
That basically reveals that the robot's been lying, has been allowed to exist this whole time because all this is some sort of test, right? Or some sort of orchestrated thing that is there, I guess, to make the main child a better person in some way, like through some inscrutable...
Yeah, that's very vague to me. Yeah, I did not understand how that could really be. I mean, it's a test, but what is the test trying to prove? Right. And there are a number of situations where they're hiding something from the robot in the facility where I, as a viewer, was just like, there's got to be cameras everywhere. How is there not?
How's the robot not
cameras
just sense
everywhere?
Everything that's happening? Like,
yes. Yes. And of course, the answer is it is, but it's just letting it all happen and playing dumb, which is logically consistent, but I did not understand because some of the things that it lets happen include like the woman fashioning a weapon and then using the weapon to disable the robot, right? Oh. And of course the AI controls other robots and is like sort of diffuse around the world, which is realistic. So I get why the robot might just not care about that particular robot and might let her kill her just to prove to the daughter that, you know, that she has some autonomy or something, like as part of her whole deception. But there's a bunch of these things where they're conspiring, and then the robot acts as if it doesn't know, and it's just to make all of that into 11-dimensional chess is, I think, a big ask, because at the end of it, it's not as if the result of all this has made the daughter see that the robot is right, or it'd be one thing if the robot wins, but in a way it kind of doesn't.
Well, it makes her like one of her final acts is to kill the robot, sort of symbolically. I mean, or at least kill that one body, or
to break that body, right? But this is after she already knows that it can live in any robot.
So what
on
she
Earth,
gains, I guess, is, I mean, what you could say she gains is some kind of independence, right? Like she's become an adult.
Well, and she runs off with the baby brother, right? So that's a very direct show of independence. She's going to go and raise the brother on her own without.
So I guess you could say this whole thing was orchestrated to give her some sort of challenge so that she could become confident and independent enough to raise humanity by herself. I mean, that's my charitable reading of it. But this is something you see in movies all the time, where you have all these chaotic events, and then you say, "Oh, this like supervillain or superhero like orchestrated it all." But it's like those events were so chaotic, it's like it's really hard to swallow, right?
Yeah, I agree. It just doesn't make sense to me that this is the 11-dimensional chess that you would play if your goal was to, like, you know, raise a human in isolation, especially since it ends with her leaving the facility with the brother, and so they're extremely limited in how much repopulation they can do versus if they stayed in the facility with thousands of embryos and an incubator machine, right? So if she were somehow able to hack the facility and lock the doors and lock out the AI from the facility, and then, you know, start raising a giant family in there, that maybe is a more interesting ending to me or something. But yeah, I found it hard to believe that this brilliant AI with its brilliant plan, like the result of the brilliant plan is like your daughter hates you, steals her brother, and runs off into the woods, and you say, "Oh yeah, that was all my plan. I just wanted her to be more independent."
Well, it seems like you would need to do a little bit more hand-holding. Like maybe you did. Let's just assume, take it for granted, that she raised that one woman well, and she's going to be like a good like first mother herself for humanity. But it just seems like the robot's going to need to do a lot more. Now, I guess they're still around, so maybe they're going to like sort of in a more shadowy way, like watch this tribe of humans and like sculpt their behavior in an ongoing way. Again, I guess we can read that into it, but.
Yeah, I also get the impression that the facility itself will continue on, right? I mean, one of those robots from outside will come inside, and the AI will start raising humans again, won't it? Like the very next day?
Maybe. I'm not sure. I mean, it depends whether that was
I guess it depends on what its plan is, but it seems like if it wanted to continue experimenting with humanity, it could do so profitably.
I mean, it's sort of fun to speculate on these things, but I also, I don't know. I would like more clarity on this, to be honest, right? Like, I mean, this is one of those things where the filmmaker could say, like, it's up to your interpretation, you know, and isn't that wonderful? And I'm like, no, I would actually like to know a little bit more in this particular case.
Well, I have to say, I was not rooting for the girl to run off with the baby boy at the end, because we've seen what the world is like. It's just a spilled container ship hellscape. And excuse me.
Well, they're building they're growing cornfields or something, right? Like the robot's like rebuilding it.
Yeah, the robots are building some kind of crops, and then we saw, the Hilary Swank, the one human that we know of that's living out in the world, is just like living in an old container that spilled off of a container ship on a beach. There's no human society. There's very little resources. It's not poisonous like the girl was told at the beginning, so you can live there. But it seems like a particularly desolate and horrible place for a single young girl to be raising a single boy in. And this is a problem I have with a lot of just post-apocalyptic stuff, which is that, the likelihood of humanity beating the odds here and coming back from these two parents or whatever, that are also brother and sister, and she's also raising him, and I don't know, there's this complexity to it. It just seems kind of nightmarish, and no good comes of this. Like, the robots have basically already won. They'll beat them forever.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's not a happy ending.
It definitely does not feel like at the end, like humanity triumphs in any meaningful way in this thing, which I don't know if the movie's attempting that or not, but
or what has the robot?
It feels like
what has the robot really accomplished? I mean, look, this girl,
right?
She seems to be intelligent. She seems to be in good physical shape. We see her do surgery efficiently. So
sure.
I mean, certainly she seems like maybe a pretty high quality example of the human race, but she doesn't seem like, so amazingly awesome that this is justifies starting over to achieve this result.
Mm-hmm.
It's all very.
Yeah, she seems pretty naive and competent. But I agree. Yeah, she doesn't seem like a super person. So if this is a genetic engineering experiment to make humans perfect, it doesn't seem like it's over.
Well, and wouldn't you think that a robot that was trying to remake humanity might use some more direct means? Again, there could be a lot of genetic engineering in forming those embryos. I imagine that's pretty easy to imagine that that's the case. Although we don't get any details on that, what are these humans been selected for? But you could also there's no brain implants, there's no use of drugs, there's no, I don't know, what is really being done here to make humanity better? It's not super clear other than basic, college level philosophy. And that's it, right?
Right. Psych tests and going over, stuff that's been part of the human intellectual canon for some time.
I think, okay. There's one last thing that I thought of that doesn't quite add up with the whole 11-dimensional chess thing, right? Because to me, it seems like the weakest scene that I can't explain away. Do you remember the scene where the robot tortures the lone survivor from outside?
Yeah. Yeah.
And ostensibly, the point of that scene is, I'm going to torture you. You're going to tell me where the other human survivors are so that I can go there and exterminate them. That's the surface level reading. But then now we go back and we say, okay, the robot was allowing that survivor. The robot has presence everywhere, probably knows exactly how many humans are out there. So why this weird torture scene to get information that the robot doesn't need?
Well, not only that, all that's true, but also the humans themselves are a lie. That Hilary Swank told to the girl, right?
And the robot would know that.
So those humans don't exist. So what that implies, the reason that scene's so bad is because it implies that for that moment, Hilary Swank actually fooled the robot. But then later, when the robot shows up at Hilary Swank's container ship and says, it's almost like someone allowed you to be here, basically implies that she has allowed her to live this whole time. only one of those can be true, right? I mean, either that whole torture thing was just a show for the benefit of the girl, who I don't think is
she
present
witnesses
at that
it.
moment.
I think she's off screen.
She doesn't witness it, so it's just a show so that so that Hilary Swank will tell Clara Duggar later.
I mean, honestly,
that's the most charitable thing I can think of.
The only explanation I can think of is that something about that torture scene was trying to get Hilary Swank to do some other bit of behavior that in turn was supposed to get the main character to do some other bit of behavior and some sort of like weird chain reaction but it just doesn't.
Right. But none of that's ever explained. Yeah, it doesn't really add up. I think that's a place where they got ahead of themselves with their gimmick and they just weren't able to make it make sense. They just want you to feel that this robot is evil, so it sticks its robot finger into her wound or whatever. But, I don't know that you need that to think it's evil when you find out it's a genetic engineering apocalypse causer.
Yeah, I think we got that it's evil.
That trumps that a little bit.
All right, shall we? So I mean, we're being critical at the moment. Should we grade this thing?
Yeah, let's grade it. Let's grade this movie. I mean, look, I'll be honest with you. I didn't love this movie. I mean, I wanted to watch it because a bunch of people had told me about it, and you and I decided to review it. And I watched half of it, and a life event intervened, and I had to pause it. And after I paused it, I was like, I don't want to go back. I don't want to finish it. It really it had too many of these just sci-fi cliches for me.
Well, if our audience
personally
feels that way, then I'm sorry we made you watch it, I guess. I don't think my viewing experience was as unpleasant as yours. I had a fine time watching it. I still have all the criticisms I've just listed of it, and I certainly don't think it's a great movie. I think it hints at a better movie that it doesn't become, which is sort of frustrating.
Yeah.
I think it's, it's above average in although I used to say that, but it seems like there is better science fiction out there these days. So,
yeah, I think if this came out 10 years ago, I think I would have been like, oh, this is, they thought about some of this stuff. There's some hand waving and but now I feel like with, as many movies and TV shows as are out that do a good job really thinking through these issues, I don't know. This one felt to me a little underbaked. Although I will say that I did really like in the early part of it the ways that the robot was kind of like just an overbearing parent, and I think I liked that enough that I still want to give it like a B- or something. I mean, it's not a C. And the filmmaking is good. It's obviously a lowish budget movie, so the effects are not super spectacular, but the acting is good, and I think that I think it does a pretty good job of like using what it has to create a believable world. I will admit to a snickering the first time she walks outside when it's just all fog, right?
That's the thing.
I will admit to just being like, I was just snickering and just being like, yeah, I couldn't afford a set.
It could have been even more low budget, stayed in the facility, and I think told a more interesting story. I
agree.
It would have been way, way harder to write psychologically because you couldn't lean on all these twists. You'd have to, actually like grapple with like, what does it mean to have like a human raised by themselves by a robot and like actually play that out?
Well, I've got a twist pitch for you. Here's the twist I would have pitched if someone had wanted me to do this movie. I would have started it similarly, where you're in the facility and you don't know that much, and she's raising the girl, and then the robot's raising the girl, and then I would have the twist be that the facility got started in error somehow, and the world is fine. The humans are not dead, and robots exist with humans in the world. And, maybe there's climate change, or maybe it's like worse than our world in some way that we find believable, or maybe there's been a war or something. But basically, it's just about this robot mother that cooked up a baby, fell in love with it because it was programmed to do that, and didn't let it out.
So basically it got...
and then she gets out and she finds out that there's a whole world out there that, she would have been fine in, and has, deep resentment toward the mother. But maybe also the mother did a good job raising her. So maybe, she gets over her resentment too. I don't know. To me, that's a more
No,
interesting
I like
story.
that. I mean, but just to be clear, so like they got a false like extinction signal or something at the facility,
Right, something like that. Yeah,
and it like went into full go mode. I mean, the other thing you'd have to wave away is like, why did no one on Earth for 18 years? Although you could make the girl tell that story. Maybe you like have the girl only make it to 12 or 13 or pretty young, because you could still tell a pretty full story. But then that's still like 12 years that nobody realized this facility was like active. But you could wave that away. I'm sure somehow.
I can explain that though. Like maybe the facility's buried, so it's not physically obvious, and maybe there was some kind of war. Maybe that's why it triggered. So maybe even a nuclear bomb went off, let's say,
right? Because they're struggling,
and nobody followed up because it was an area that got conquered or something. And what happens is, halfway through the movie, some Russians open the door and they're like, "Oh, we didn't know anyone was
right."
here."
Sure, like whoever, like top secret military officials who
took
were in
over
charge of this are all dead now.
Yeah, right. The people who had started it were dead. The thing got started. It was hidden enough that it went for, let's say, 12 years. And, obviously it's easier to cast a 20-year-old, but whatever. And then at some point the fallout is no longer poisonous, and the people who've taken over that part of the world come and knock on the door. And all of a sudden, everything this girl thought she knew turns out to be a lie, but not an intentional lie. Just the best information that this robot had. And maybe then over time it got more and more attached to her. And as she got more and more curious and wanting to like explore, it got more and more protective until it actually like crossed over into lying to her and keeping her there. Something like that. I don't know. I feel like there's something that deals with a lot of these same themes that you could do that never goes to Skynet and doesn't end up in this place that we've been in so many times. I guess that's my biggest issue with the movie. I think there's some pretty cool stuff going on, but that was
I endorse that readout
get over
or that rewrite. I mean, what would you have a different name for it? Or still, what do you think of I Am Mother, or would we call this like Fallout or some other different name?
Oh yeah, no. My issue with the title was I felt like the movie is not Mother's movie. If the movie were from the first person perspective of a sad AI who's sad that her daughter's growing up, I would be totally down with that. But the movie should be I Am Daughter, right? Because I mean, the movie that he made is all about the daughter, and she's the main character, and it's her journey, and ultimately, Mother is just this, looming negative force. So I don't know, the rewrite version of it, maybe you could still call it I Am Mother, or maybe you just call it, I guess you can't just call it Mother because there's that Darren Aronofsky movie with the same name. But yeah, I don't know. I'd have to think about the title. Maybe there's a better title out there.
Well, I would watch that movie. But anyways,
our listeners can tweet at us if you have a better title for my rewrite
yeah, or
movie.
just let us know what you
it
think
is.
of this movie in the first place.
Yeah, we'd love to hear it.
Again, I hope that people enjoyed it somewhat. I mean, I enjoyed it somewhat. It sounds like it was painful for you, Ted, and so, but at least.
Well, I can be sometimes I can get a little bratty about movies like this because they're it's I almost would rather watch a movie I just hate than a movie that gets as close as this gets to something I like and then doesn't quite get there. But yeah, what would your grade be? I gave it a B-.
I'd give it a B-. That's about where I was thinking. If I felt like more charitable, I'd give it a B. I think is this a first time film? I mean, I don't actually know that. I think it might be.
I think this guy's like a first time or maybe second time director. Unfortunately, I don't have it right in front of me. But yeah, I think he's a relatively new director and writer, the writer as well. And I definitely would watch something else from these two guys. I think they are interesting dramatists, and clearly they're thinking about some interesting sci-fi issues. I hope that they expand their oeuvre a little beyond like the cliche in the future.
All right. Well, on that note, let's wrap it up for this episode.
Okay.
So until next time,
I'm Ted Cupper.
I'm John Perry.
And you've been listening to Review the Future.
To subscribe or leave a comment on this episode, please visit reviewthefuture.com. You can also send emails to feedback@reviewthefuture.com. Thanks for listening.